5, 4, 3.
It's the greatest single journey ever undertaken by man.
Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Leaving the Earth to walk on the surface of the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
My guest was there.
It wasn't really that colour, was it?
No.
Buzz Aldrin, one of the greatest of all astronauts and the second man ever to walk on the moon. He'll tell us about the fuel economy of a NASA launch.
When the rocket lifted off, it was getting 7 inches to the gallon.
Battling his own personal demons after returning to Earth.
It led to some things that I had to deal with, depression, alcoholism.
And he'll reveal his plans to save the human race.
Permanence on another planet that could be the survival of all mankind.
From mankind's earliest days, human beings have looked up at the stars and wondered, what's out there? To some, space represents mystery.
That is awesome.
To others, meaning.
I want to go. I want to go up in space.
We have explored the Earth, so we got to go explore something else.
Yet the historical trip in 1969 that finally put man on the moon was born not just out of curiosity, but out of conflict. The late 1940s saw the birth of a new form of warfare, an ideological battle between East and West, a Cold War.
These are the first publicly shown films of Russian research rockets.
The United States and the Soviet Union raced each other to harness rocket and missile technology, delivery mechanisms for the newly developed atomic bomb.
We were in a Cold War. We were building missiles to counteract the Soviet missiles. And yet the president committed us to a program that would inspire the nation, develop its technology, show us and the rest of the world that we were not being overcome by the Soviet Union, that we would not be buried, as Khrushchev said. We will bury you.
Yes.
We will not allow that to happen.
Born in the town of Montclair, New Jersey in 1930, Edwin Eugene Buzz Aldrin would not allow that to happen either. Flight was in Buzz's family genes.
My mother was born in 1903, the year of the Wright Brothers, and my father was an early pioneer. After he learned to fly in the service, he commanded the Air Corps Engineering School in Dayton, Ohio, for about 5 years. And it was that institution that later became the Air Force Institute of Technology that paid for my doctor's degree at MIT. So it really kind of came around.
The people who gave you ideas of what you could achieve were the Wright Brothers. If you look on there, you'll see a bit of the Wright Brothers in action.
Lots of wood and canvas and glue and wires. Did you see that weight coming down?
Yes.
I saw the model of that in Lyon, France.
Really?
When Wilbur went over to teach the French how to fly. Yeah, it was a catapult to accelerate the craft forward.
Oh, right. When did you really first fly? How old?
Fly?
Yeah.
Well, I was 21, just out of West Point during the the end of that first summer. Went out of West Point. I was commissioned in the Air Force. And I went through pilot training and soloed probably right at the end of 51, early 52. Maybe not at the absolute top of the class, but kind of up there.
Straight out of flight school, things took an unexpected turn.
The first classman at West Point had been given a tour during the summer of MacArthur's occupation in Japan, and the night we got there, we were in the BOQ, Bachelor Officers' Quarters. Next morning, underneath the door, Stars and Stripes newspaper said, "North Korea invades South Korea." So that changed our plans, and of course, at the end of 52, beginning 1953, and for that, I was serving in Korea as a second lieutenant, young combat pilot.
In Korea, communists took on capitalists. It was Buzz's first brush with the Cold War.
I'm stationed here at an advanced base in Korea, flying with the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing.
In 1953, cameras mounted on Buzz's own aircraft captured a series of extraordinary images. A Soviet pilot shot down by Buzz, ejecting from his stricken MiG.
I remember my 37th mission rather vividly. That was the mission I got my first MiG destroyed.
While Buzz was fighting communists in Korea, the Cold War was taking a new turn.
Premier Khrushchev himself in August 1956 officially announced the Soviet development of an intercontinental ballistic missile. If the Soviets could send up such missiles, they could also send up Earth satellites.
2, 1, стреляй!
The next year, the Soviets did send up a satellite, Sputnik. America was losing the space race. Desperate to regain the upper hand, in 1959, the United States launched Project Mercury. The Soviets may have launched a satellite. The Americans were going one better. They were going to launch people.
Had you by that stage started to dream of being an astronaut?
Well, I was a fighter pilot in Germany, and I was reading in Life magazine, just like many other people, the selected people to fly in the one-man Mercury craft. And it said that these are all qualified test pilots. And that had not been in my projected career field to become a highly coordinated reporting on airplanes coming on. I was clearly interested in beyond that, into the future.
Buzz moved into academia, completing a PhD on rendezvous in space. While he worked, America's Mercury program struggled to keep up with the Soviets. And in 1961, the Russians beat them again. On April the 12th, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space. President Kennedy took up the challenge.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
And that became your text as well as John F. Kennedy's.
Yes, and when he made that speech before Congress, I was at MIT working on my studies because I knew that there was a two-man program to follow Mercury, and that they were going to demonstrate rendezvous, computer reentry, spacewalking, long-duration flights before to really be ready to go into the three-man Apollo program. And of course, that was going to carry out this May 1961 commitment before the end of the 60s. I tried to apply when my good friend Ed White, he rotated back from the squadron that I was in Germany and went through the test pilot school. He said, It's 1962, Buzz, and NASA is looking for a new set of astronauts. And he said, I'm going to apply. And I said, well, I'm going to apply too. First time, of course, I didn't meet the test pilot requirement, but they changed that in 1963.
How did you get the news that you were going to be part of the astronaut program?
In October of 1963, I received a phone call from Deke Slayton. He said, how'd you like to join the astronaut corps? And that was 1 month before President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. So I started training in 1964.
In an inflated pressure suit, astronaut Edwin Aldrin is weighted with 60 pounds of lead.
Buzz was allocated to NASA's Project Gemini. Goal? To prepare for a manned landing on the moon.
Underwater simulation creates a condition of neutral buoyancy. It gives the pilot an effect quite similar to that of zero gravity.
Because of my background experience in rendezvous, I really expected that I would be on one of the early Gemini rendezvous flights. It didn't work out that way. I was going to be on a backup mission and might fly on a mission after the last one. In other words, it was dead-ended assignment, except that there was a tragic accident and my backdoor neighbor was killed in a crash in St. Louis. And that opened up Jim Lovell and I to be on the backup crew of Gemini 9 and the primary crew on Gemini 12.
Liftoff came at 3:46 Eastern Standard Time.
Gemini 12 proved to be the last of the Gemini series. Buzz's spacewalks and practice in mid-air docking paved the way for Project Apollo. Next stop, the moon.
The Apollo 8, an incredible adventure when 3 intrepid spirits circled the moon, fascinating the imagination of man.
Neil Armstrong and I were on the backup crew to Frank Borman and his crew that in December of 1968 went to the moon and read from Genesis over Christmas time.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form.
Neil and I were on the backup crew. We worked closely. So from that point, when they came back from a successful mission, first human beings ever to get to the moon in orbit, a very bold maneuver because it looked like the Russians just might send somebody around the moon, not into orbit, but around the moon and back. They didn't really do it, but it looked like they might. So that's why we advanced that pioneering mission. And being on that backup crew and a crew to Apollo 9 and 10, we would be assigned to Apollo 11. And at that time, it looked as though that could be the first landing.
Can you remember the night before you went? Were you able to sleep or unable to sleep?
Not very
well. Too excited or what?
Well, I'd been into space once before. And fighter pilots not supposed to have fear.
Right.
Okay? It's a paralyzing emotion. It alters your ability to look at what you're doing right now with great clarity. So I guess we fulfill the description of having ice in our veins.
At 6:54 a.m. on July the 16th, 1969, Buzz, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins boarded the 36-story tall, 3,000-ton Saturn V rocket that was to launch them into history. Destination? The moon.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6.
When when the rocket lifted off, it was getting 7 inches to the gallon. Pretty high fuel consumption.
That's incredible. 7 inches to the gallon.
Yeah. It was a slow departure. We'd like to go through the atmosphere a little faster.
When Apollo was safely underway, control of the mission was switched to Houston.
Apollo 11, this is Houston, and everything is go.
Roger. Ignition.
We confirm ignition, and the thrust is go.
Houston, Apollo 11, how many miles out do you have it now?
Roughly about 50,000.
Apollo 11 traveled 400,000 kilometers in just 3 days.
Approaching the moon, the way the geometry works out, the sun coming from one direction and we're going this way, the moon is going to be in front of the sun. It's going to eclipse it. But of course now the moon is big and the sun is kind of small. And that was just a phenomenal sight to see this black object illuminated from behind by the sun.
Plus, correction, 00572. Perigee, plus.
Apollo went into orbit around the moon. The journey that had taken the lifetime of mankind was nearing its crucial moment.
Hello, Apollo 11, Houston. We're wondering if you started into the limb yet, over.
The most technically challenging event was to take that spacecraft from orbiting around the moon and make that descent and landing.
Okay, all flight controllers going around the horn, gonna go for undocking. Okay, retro, go. Fido, go. Guide, go. Control.
People need to realize that the importance of Apollo 11 was really not walking on the surface. You can't walk on the surface unless you've landed.
Eagle, Houston, we see you on the steerable, over. Roger, Eagle, done, dock. Roger, how does it look? The Eagle has wings. Roger.
As we're coming down, there was a light that came on. It was a fuel quantity light. At the same time that mission control said 60 seconds. How much fuel we had left?
60 seconds. Right.
And we're still maybe 100 feet above the ground. We got a lot of ways to go.
Picking up some dust. Great shadow.
You had, what, 20 seconds to get down at the end, didn't you?
Well, that's how much fuel we had left after the 11-minute powered descent.
Was that a pretty frightening moment?
Frightening, no. Tense, critical for the future.
Yeah.
Exactly.
4 forward, drift into the right a little. 30 seconds forward, drift.
We're about 10 feet, and I felt we're going to make it. And it was just a question of easing down those last 10 feet to make the contact. And I could see our shadow in front of us. And I could see the dust being sprayed out, causing sort of a haze when it was so precise before. Now all of a sudden it's hazy because the dust is going out. And the little probe touches the surface, it sends a message up to the computer, and the light comes on, contact light. Neil's looking out the window, see, and I'm looking at the instruments. So that's what I said to the world, to Neil, everybody else, contact light.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, the Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The 1969 moon landing was the most popular television event of all time. More than 500 million people watched it live.
I'd like to take this opportunity to ask every person listening in to pause for a moment and contemplate the events of the past few hours and to give thanks in his or her own way.
I wanted, with a successful landing, to just add to that something that would be meaningful, somewhat sort of to me, but more as a symbol to other people.
And did you feel that God had been on your side?
Not for me to make that decision.
No, for God to make it.
And the awareness of it is in different people's minds, and as they go through life, they have changes in their perception of a higher power and of a deity, and certainly since that time, that was appropriate, I felt. I don't think I'd do the same thing now, but I'm not going to be given the chance to do it either.
Do you think you can open the hatch at this pressure, about 0.12 psi? We're going to try it. Roger. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming. The surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. I'm going to step off the laminate. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The famous quote that Neil Armstrong made, and obviously he'd been preparing that some time in advance.
We didn't know whether he'd prepared that ahead of time. As a matter of fact, Mike said, what are you going to say when you get down, when we get down to the surface? He said, well, let's get there first, and I'll think of course, we had a good bit of time getting ready, several hours.
Oh, some people didn't understand the quote at all, did they?
Now, Neil's small step for man, which was his step, one human being, but humankind made a gigantic leap in going to the moon to be able to do that. Now, some people could say that it's a small step, Apollo going to the moon, a giant leap, and they've thought about the future. When is the giant leap going to happen? Yeah. But that wasn't meant to be a prophetic proclamation for the future.
Neil and Buzz had done it, but they had a long way to go. How they got home and what happened next, we'll learn in part 2, when we also hear about what it was like finally to set foot on the moon.
It was magnificent, but it's not very habitable. It's very lifeless.
Buzz's travel claim when he got home.
$33 for Apollo 11. That's what I received as compensation.
And America's new competitors in the space race.
All the Chinese have to do is land one person for one day, and they beat America back to the moon.
I'm in California with American hero Buzz Aldrin, the second man ever to walk on the moon. July the 21st, 1969. After a 400,000-kilometer journey, Buzz and Neil Armstrong have made it to the surface of the moon.
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston? Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture.
On Earth, 500 million people are watching live as Buzz prepares to exit the lunar module.
Okay, ready for me to come out? All set.
Now I want to back up and partially close the hatch, making sure not to lock it on my way out.
Okay, I'm on the top step. It's a very simple matter to hop down from one step to the next. There you go. Beautiful, beautiful. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
You came up with your own words, which you came up at the time about magnificent desolation.
Yes, I certainly didn't think of it at the time. It was a reaction, maybe. Neil had an optimistic way of using the word beautiful.
It has a stark beauty all its own. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
But when I looked out, it wasn't beautiful. It was desolate, totally lifeless. Really, not much except shades of gray and a black horizon. It was magnificent, but it's not very habitable. It's very lifeless.
And what about when you actually walked on the moon? What did it feel like? Did it feel like Earth or different?
Is not that much different from walking around, one foot in front of the other. It's springy, you're lightweight, and when you start to move a little more rapidly, it takes a little longer to come down from each step. But it is very simple, and so it didn't take any accommodation at all to realize that moving around was really going to be simple. It was what we did.
Buzz is erecting the solar wind experiment now.
Every precious minute of their 2.5 hours on the surface was programmed. Rock and soil samples were to be collected, photographs taken.
Then the first man on the moon read a plaque attached to a leg of the Eagle.
Dear men from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon, July 1969, AD. We came in peace for all mankind.
We came in peace for all mankind. Very prophetic words that really summarized what we've been doing in space.
The President of the United States would like to say a few words to you, over. That would be an honor.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world.
The single most iconic image of the entire mission. Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, photographed by the first.
A lot of people feel that it would have been fairer and right if you had been the first man on the moon.
No.
Looking back 40 or 50 years ago, can you now say, yes, it was a disappointment?
Every outside the spacecraft spacewalk that had been made up to Apollo 11 had not been the commander, always the junior person, because he was doing experiments and the commander was responsible for very critical things. Now we're going to land on the moon, and that's the commander. So there was a lack of uniformity as to what we were going to do. If, as I was, if Neil had been looking out the window while his junior partner went down the ladder and began making steps, it just would have been impossible to explain why we would do this, why the commander would not execute the culmination. This is in the press and public's mind. And as it was, I'm not the first man. Forever and ever, I'll be known as the second man on the moon. But that's okay.
Did you think back as you were there, I've just been through an experience that no one has ever been through before. This is absolutely extraordinary. This is literally out of this world.
Well, we were thinking of what's coming next. Yeah. We had to lift off.
You're cleared for takeoff. 9, 8.
And then get into orbit and then make complicated maneuvers.
Yeah, beautiful. 26, 36 feet per second up. 5 little pitch over. Very smooth.
When the moment actually came, were you sad or glad to be leaving the moon?
It's a very complicated mission. And as people, it's never over till it's over. And go to sleep on the bed in Houston.
Re-entry into the Earth's invisible atmosphere carries with it one of the most critical moments. Traveling nearly 25,000 miles per hour, the command module can miss the angle of re-entry by only several degrees and disintegrate into flames, or bounce off into space, never to return.
What was the reaction you got when you landed back on Earth? Did it take you by surprise?
No, I don't think it was by surprise, because the three of us, plus an engineer who prepared the food for us, we were escorted into this isolation trailer from the moment we landed, because we might have brought back some germs from the moon that could be rather harmful to people here on Earth. It wasn't to protect us. We were already contaminated, but it was to protect other people. It's called, in a way, back contamination. We're worried about contaminating the moon and worried about contaminating the purity of whatever has existed on the moon and Mars, but there's also the danger of back contamination, and that's why we were isolated for 21 days after leaving the surface of the moon.
Finally, on August the 10th, 1969, the astronauts emerged and faced the world. Everywhere they went, they were hailed as heroes.
This pretty thick book is sort of an encyclopedia of a trip.
Yes.
And we went around the world and visited 25, 27 countries in 45 days. Mexico first, and Berlin. Of course, we had a look at the Berlin Wall. Now we're in London. Oh, yes. The Queen. Bombay. Now that's a crowd of people. 1,500,000 people lined the motorcade.
Netherlands here, Madrid there, and so on. I mean, you were really famous all over the world, weren't you?
And a lot of other places, too. Yeah.
Beyond the world.
We were indeed young, fiery people then. And we were pretty glad this trip was over with by the time we came back.
Publicity tours and press conferences were not the reason Buzz had joined the astronaut corps.
That was our occupation when we came back. It wasn't to train other people, but it was to do things that were not natural for a reserved, introverted maybe, certainly not an extrovert person like myself.
This is a question for Buzz Aldrin.
Disillusion started to set in.
I reflected back, maybe with a little humor, on the official travel voucher that I applied to NASA for this entire trip of leaving Houston, going to Florida, leaving Florida on a government rocket, arriving at the moon, then coming back. So my travel voucher for all of that time was $33 for Apollo 11. That's what I received as compensation.
And where do you go after you've been to the moon?
I wanted to return to the military service, the Air Force, that I came from. I was given the assignment of commandant of the test pilot school. And we've already talked about the fact that being a test pilot was not my real objective in my career. And after about a year, it appeared as though this probably is not leading to the career back in the Air Force that I was looking for, so I retired. And that's when sort of the bottom dropped out, and I began to think about what it is I'm going to do. And inherited depression from my mother's family. My grandfather committed suicide. She committed suicide a year before I went to the moon. It became evident that this was something that maybe I had observed a little bit in myself, having a little bit of anxiety and sort of wanting to ease my way out of things.
Fame and success suddenly seemed a long way away. Unemployed and depressed, Buzz turned to alcohol. And within 8 years of walking on the moon, he was working as a car salesman in Beverly Hills.
How did you make it right again? How did you regain your zest for life?
I decided, with the help of people, that I would write a story about my life, and the title of the book was not Journey to the Moon, it was Return to Earth. And because of the disclosure, I was the national chairman for mental health. Matter of fact, I'm working that way now with our warriors coming back from combat. 22 suicides a day. That's disastrous future for these people who've been supporting our country with their lives.
While Buzz was moving in other directions, America's space program was losing its way too.
After Apollo, there was some question, what do we do next? And there was an effort made toward a very advanced launch system, reusable booster, reusable orbiter. That turned out to be, because of its characteristics, too expensive. So we had to cancel that and go into the space shuttle program.
And liftoff. Liftoff.
As wonderful a technical achievement it was very expensive. People were expecting 40, 50 launches a year. Never came close. 9 was the most, 6 was kind of the average, and because of that lower launch rate, the costs really went up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Tragically, the shuttle also proved somewhat unreliable. In 1986, Challenger exploded shortly after takeoff. 7 crew members were killed. 17 years later, Columbia burned up on re-entry. Another 7 astronauts died.
When we had the second accident, clearly we only have 3 orbiters left. It's time to start looking elsewhere. The accident board that I listened to, attended a number of the meetings, said we should ease out of the shuttle after 2010. And the president's new program in January '04 said we're going to finish the space station, retire the shuttle again at the end of 2010, build spacecraft that were needed, and go back to the moon by 2020.
We will build new ships to carry man forward into the universe, to gain a new foothold on the moon.
Buzz took issue with this decision.
To go back and do what we did 40, 45, 50 years ago is not leadership in the world. We've already done that. Are we going to do Apollo 11 over again? Are we going to do Apollo 17 with rovers, 3 days expedition? The bar is pretty high for what the U.S. would do if we decided to commit large resources to going back to the moon. All the Chinese have to do is land one person for 1 day, and they beat America back to the moon. Do we want to tell this to our young people? Is that leadership in space? It's moving on to new challenges, and don't spend your resources on things that are not leading to inspiring young people, inspiring technicians to the future.
And so do you think in the future we can look forward to a situation where we human beings start to live on other planets?
I'm working very strongly on permanent human beings from the Earth, establishing a permanent settlement on Mars. I won't be around to really see it happen, but some of the ways that we get there, I think, maybe end up being a much bigger heritage for my contributions, I hope. Not living in the past, but moving it ahead.
With half a century of expertise on space travel, Buzz is a powerful advocate for the exploration of deep space. and the Obama administration agrees with him, shelving plans to visit the moon.
A human mission to Mars is today the ultimate destination in our solar system for humanity, and it is a priority for NASA. Our entire exploration program is aligned to support this goal.
But times have changed. With the Cold War long over, the space race now includes a host of new commercial players.
We need the innovation that comes from the resources that are available and the commercial bringing together the talents, the mechanisms that exist. And a wealthy person who bought his own ride into space on a Russian rocket and a Russian spacecraft is heading up a study right now, rocketing a private spacecraft on a swing-by of Mars in 2018.
This is a challenging but attainable goal for advancing human experience and knowledge. Now is the time.
From now on, we won't just be visiting planets. We'll be staying.
Another private initiative is currently seeking volunteers for a one-way trip to Mars. 80,000 people have applied in just 2 weeks. Initial costs, $6 billion.
People here on Earth say, we need the money for poverty, we need the money for disease, we need the money for all of these things. What is the point of spending that money on going to Mars? What's your answer to that, Buzz?
What did we have in the 60s and 70s? Undisputed leadership in the world in technology, as exhibited by the Apollo program. And many people were inspired to get into high technology jobs. And look at what Silicon Valley has done, the advance of computers. We lead the world. And in these hard economic times, we need to inspire people.
Since 1975, NASA has had robots operating on the surface of Mars. Why are people necessary?
Controlling very complex robots from the surface of the Earth is difficult. What they have done in 5 years could have been done in 1 week if we had human intelligence in orbit at Mars, telling these what to do on a continuous basis. That's how important it is to get human intelligence close to where the robots are operating.
Right. And do you think that, in fact, that we would discover then that on other planets in space and outer space, that in fact there are peoples, or whatever we call them, who have greater intelligence than we do on Earth?
I don't know. Neither does anybody else know here, despite the claims. It's wonderful fiction to contemplate what a species, what a living species could be motivated by to travel years and years to another rather unknown object. And you have to have a very good reason to go through the expense and the time of making that travel. You have to be facing total destruction of your civilization.
As the Russian meteorite strike in February 2013 reminded us, the human race may itself be facing just such a threat.
Everything that we look at and then examined on the moon was tremendously influenced by impacts in the early evolution of the solar system. But impacts are still possible. The meteor crater in Arizona, a big rock. The dinosaurs are no longer with us because of a big impact in the Gulf of Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula. Even 1908, a large object exploded close to the ground and decimated a part of Siberia in Russia. So we know that things are coming, and given a period of time, will act as a threat to humanity.
It will be difficult enough to avoid disaster in the next 100 years, let alone the next 1,000 or million. Our only chance of long-term survival is not to remain inward-looking on planet Earth, but to spread out into space.
I was prompted to have an initial meeting with Stephen Hawking and said, well, I'm working on how we can not take 200 years, but begin to establish something in 30 so years.
NASA's astronauts are currently set to orbit Mars by the 2030s. Landing on the surface will follow shortly afterwards. Today, 60 years after Sputnik launched the space race, we're still reaching for the skies. Thanks to Buzz and his colleagues, we know more. We've been there. We'll go again. And who knows, perhaps next time we'll stay.
Can you imagine 1,000, 5,000 years in the future, looking back on the history of Earth, where we have been doing all these things, advancing technology, all of a sudden, Earthlings, human beings, make a commitment, and they go and fulfill that commitment to another planet in the solar system. That's monumental in my way of thinking, of predicting what history would be like. If we get a permanence on another planet, that could be the survival of all mankind.
Thank you so much, Buzz. It's been a very memorable experience for us all.
I appreciated the opportunity to share with you.